I didn't know my entire marriage was about to be put up for sale over dinner. Not metaphorically, not emotionally, literally. A check, legal papers, a price tag placed on my life, my vows, and the man I loved. But I'm getting ahead of myself. What you need to understand first is this. For years, everyone in that room believed I was powerless. Just a woman with a modest job, a sensible car, and a life that, by their standards, fell embarrassingly short of what I should have achieved. They believed my husband Daniel had married beneath himself. They believed I was the liability. And they were so confident in that belief that they thought money alone could erase me. I remember the exact moment it happened. The dining room was silent, except for the faint clink of crystal being cleared away. The air smelled like expensive wine and entitlement. Daniel's father slid a leather portfolio across the table toward me, with the calm precision of a man who had never once been told no. Inside were annulment papers and a check for $500,000. His mother didn't even look at me. She was already mentally rewriting her son's future, one without me in it. They called it a solution. They said they were being practical. They claimed they were doing it for Daniel's happiness. But what they were really doing was trying to buy me off. They assumed I would panic, that I would be grateful, that $500,000 would be enough to make me disappear quietly and leave no mess behind. What they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly imagine, was that the fortune funding their offer existed because of me. They didn't know I had spent years building something in silence. They didn't know their empire was standing on capital I had injected when no one else would touch it. They didn't know the man offering me money was, in every sense that mattered, already working for me. And Daniel, my husband, sat frozen beside me, watching his parents attempt to dismantle our marriage like a failed business deal. That dinner wasn't about money. It was about power, about pride, about who people reveal themselves to be when they believe they're untouchable. And by the time I stood up from that table, everything they thought they knew was about to collapse. Before that dinner, before the check, before I realized how easily love could be reduced to a line item on a balance sheet. I was 24 when my adult life truly began. I had just graduated from MIT with a degree in financial engineering. One of those fields people assume is either impossibly brilliant or completely soulless. For me, it was neither. Numbers made sense when people didn't. Markets had logic, even when emotions didn't. That same year, my grandmother passed away. She wasn't flashy. She wasn't wealthy by society standards, but she believed in preparation, discipline, and quiet independence. When her lawyer told me she'd left me $200,000, I didn't feel rich. I felt entrusted. Most of my classmates took their signing bonuses and inheritance money and turned it into visible success. Sports cars, luxury apartments, social media vacations in Europe. I went the opposite direction. I disappeared into research. For 6 months, I studied companies devastated by the 2008 financial crash. I wasn't looking for disasters. I was looking for miscalculations. Businesses with strong fundamentals that had collapsed not because they were bad, but because they'd been reckless at the wrong moment. That's when I found Blackwood Development. Daniel's father, Vincent, had expanded aggressively just before the market collapsed. Multiple projects, massive leverage. When the crash hit, buyers vanished overnight. By early 2009, the company was bleeding cash. Banks stopped answering his calls. Suppliers waited months to be paid. The stock fell from nearly $50 to under $2. Everyone else saw a corpse. I saw unrealized value. Prime real estate. Solid long-term demand. A business model that worked, if given time and oxygen. So I created an LLC with the most forgettable name imaginable. Thornfield Capital. Quiet. Invisible. Intentional. Through layered entities designed to shield my identity, I began buying Blackwood shares. Pennies on the dollar. Over the next 3 years, I accumulated ownership slowly, patiently, never triggering alarms. When Vincent couldn't secure financing, Thornfield appeared. When projects stalled, Thornfield provided capital. I didn't exploit his desperation. My terms were fair, just faster and cleaner than predatory lenders circling his company. By the time I met Daniel, I already owned nearly a third of his father's business. I met Daniel 5 years ago at a charity auction. I was there because a consulting client was receiving an award. Daniel was there because his mother had forced him into a black tie obligation he clearly resented. We both escaped to the bar at the same time. He made me laugh by mocking the artificial way wealthy people spoke at formal events. I returned the favor by admitting I had no idea which fork was correct and planned to guess confidently. We talked for 3 hours about books, about pressure, about how exhausting it is to be measured constantly against expectations you didn't choose. When the night ended, he gave me his number, with a warning. He told me his family was obsessed with money, status, and appearances. If that bothered me, he said gently, we should walk away now. I told him the truth, without telling him everything. I said, money doesn't define worth, character does. 3 months later, he proposed. 6 months after that, we married. Small ceremony, 50 people, no spectacle. Daniel insisted on simplicity. He wanted authenticity, not a performance. His parents did not hide their disappointment. Vincent's wedding toast was polished cruelty. Jokes about my modest career. Comments about my future earning potential. Smiles sharpened into weapons. I smiled back. By that day, I owned 42% of his company. But Daniel didn't know, and I didn't tell him, not because I didn't trust him, but because I needed to know something first. I needed to know whether I was loved for who I was or tolerated until I proved my worth in numbers. Marriage didn't expose the cracks immediately. At first, Daniel adapted better than I expected. He never complained about our apartment, small, clean, ordinary. He said it felt like ours, not a showroom. Our vacations were road trips and last-minute getaways instead of European tours. He framed it as freedom, simplicity, choice. But strain doesn't announce itself loudly. It seeps in. It showed up at family gatherings first. Every dinner with his parents felt like a performance review I didn't know I was attending. Vincent would seat me away from conversations that mattered, business, investments, real careers. He explained basic real estate concepts to me with exaggerated patience, as if I were a child being introduced to algebra for the first time. Daniel's mother, Isabel, preferred subtler cuts. She'd mention Daniel's ex-girlfriend, Dominic's former fiancé, a woman from the right circles. She'd wonder aloud how successful Dominic's investment fund was doing now, whether he'd bought a second property yet, whether he'd finally settled down appropriately. Daniel never defended me aggressively, not because he agreed with them, but because he was tired. He'd squeeze my hand under the table, whisper apologies in the car, tell me I didn't deserve any of it. But apologies don't undo erosion. The worst nights were holidays. Thanksgiving was brutal. Vincent spent nearly half an hour lecturing me on zoning regulations, incorrectly. I nodded, asked questions, let him finish. Daniel finally asked me later, voice tight, why I let them treat me like that. I told him the truth I could safely give. I said his father's opinion didn't define my value. I said the most powerful people in any room are usually the ones no one is watching. He didn't understand what I meant, but he let it go. What he didn't know was that I was watching. Every remark, every insult, every assumption. Not with resentment, but with curiosity. I wanted to know who these people were when they believed I held no leverage. I wanted to know whether they could ever accept me without wealth announcing my presence first. Meanwhile, the irony grew heavier. Vincent would brag about projects my capital had funded, about recoveries I had engineered quietly, about stability he believed he'd earned alone, and I would smile. The tension reached a new pitch the week his mother texted Daniel. She wanted dinner, just the 4 of us, formal, important. Daniel's voice tightened when he showed me the message. He knew the tone. He'd lived with it his entire life. He suggested we cancel. I said no, because something in my chest told me this was coming, that the experiment was nearing its conclusion. I didn't know exactly what they planned, but I knew one thing for certain. Whatever happened at that table would reveal everything. Friday night arrived with a strange, unbearable clarity. Daniel spent nearly 90 minutes getting ready. He changed outfits 4 times, caught between honoring his parents' expectations and refusing to perform for them. He finally chose something understated, elegant without surrender. I wore what Vincent always expected from someone like me: khakis, a plain button-down, the uniform of acceptable mediocrity. The drive was quiet. As we pulled into his parents' estate, 4 manicured acres, a circular driveway that felt more like an entrance to a museum than a home, Daniel reached for my hand. His grip tightened. "Whatever they're planning," he said softly, "remember, I chose you." I nodded. I believed him. Isabel answered the door herself, which immediately told me something was off. She embraced Daniel carefully, as if affection were a practiced routine, then acknowledged me with polite resignation, not warmth, tolerance. The dining room was staged for impact. Crystal glasses that could pay a month of our rent. China that looked borrowed from history. Enough silverware to intimidate anyone who hadn't been trained to belong there. Vincent stood as we entered, full suit even at home, always performing. He shook my hand too firmly, smiled too thinly, said it was good of me to join them, as if I'd been granted a privilege rather than invited. Dinner began smoothly, too smoothly. They asked Daniel about his work, praised his sacrifices. Isabel spoke at length about how much he'd adjusted his expectations since marrying me. Vincent mentioned a downtown development, my capital behind it, while explaining fundamentals like I'd never heard them before. I played my role. Then, as the main course plates were cleared, Vincent reached beside his chair and lifted a leather portfolio onto the table. The room changed instantly. He began speaking about concern, about Daniel's future, about how much they loved their son and wanted him to be happy. Isabel chimed in about compromise, about how marriage sometimes asks too much of the wrong people. Daniel tried to interrupt. Vincent raised his hand. "Let us finish." Then he opened the portfolio. Inside were legal documents, precise, expensive, final. And on top of them, a check. Even from my seat, I could see the number. 500万美元. Vincent slid the portfolio toward me with calm authority. He explained he believed in directness, that I seemed decent enough, but we should be honest. Daniel had married beneath his station. It wasn't an insult, he insisted, just a fact. Daniel could have had anyone. They'd tried to accept his choice, but watching him struggle financially because of me, that was unacceptable. So they were offering a solution. I was to sign an annulment agreement, accept the money, walk away. Daniel would be free to resume the life he was meant for. The silence afterward was suffocating. Daniel looked physically struck, as if someone had punched the air from his lungs. Isabel studied her nails. Vincent smiled faintly, already confident in his victory. I picked up the check. $500,000. For the woman they believed I was, it was supposed to be irresistible. For the woman I actually was, it was almost funny. But I didn't laugh. Not yet. I didn't speak right away. I held the check between my fingers, feeling the texture of the paper, thick, expensive, confident. The kind of check written by people who never wonder if it will clear. Vincent watched me carefully. His smile widened just slightly, like a man recognizing the exact moment leverage takes hold. Isabel still hadn't looked up. In her mind, this was already resolved. Daniel finally found his voice. "What is this?" he asked, staring at the papers as if they might rearrange themselves into something less obscene. Vincent answered without looking at his son. "A clean solution." I felt Daniel's hand brush my knee under the table, unsteady, apologetic, protective all at once. His breathing was shallow. He was embarrassed, not of me, but for me, for what they were doing. I set the check back down carefully, smoothing it flat against the tablecloth. I just want to be clear, I said, keeping my voice level. You're asking me to sign away my marriage to your son for money. Isabel finally looked up. An annulment, she corrected softly. It's different, cleaner. It means the marriage never should have happened in the first place. That was when Daniel stood. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. How dare you, he said, his voice shaking. How dare you talk about us like we're a mistake you can erase? Vincent snapped his fingers once. Sit down. The adults are talking. That sentence landed like a slap. Daniel was 28 years old, married, accomplished, and dismissed in an instant. I watched his shoulders tense, watched the old patterns try to reclaim him, and something in me hardened, not with anger, but clarity. Vincent leaned forward again, eyes fixed on me. You understand how the world works, he said calmly. Money is simply the most honest way to resolve certain situations. I nodded slowly. Then I said, I need to make a phone call. Daniel turned to me confused. What? To make sure everyone at this table understands the full picture, I replied. Vincent frowned. This has nothing to do with lawyers. I stood anyway. I called my attorney, Christopher Walsh, knowing he'd answer even on a Friday night. He always did. When he picked up, I told him exactly where I was and that something interesting had come up. I asked him to pull the current ownership structure of Blackwood Development Corporation. Then I put him on speaker. Vincent scoffed until Christopher began to speak. Methodical, precise, unemotional. He listed the share distribution. 100 million shares outstanding. The largest shareholder, Thornfield Capital, holding 47%. Vincent stiffened. I asked Christopher one final question. Who owns Thornfield Capital? There was a pause. Then, you do. The room didn't go silent. It collapsed. Daniel's mouth fell open. Isabel went completely pale. Vincent stared at my phone like it had betrayed him personally. Christopher continued explaining valuation. $11.4 billion at current market price. I met Vincent's eyes. You're offering me $500,000, I said quietly, to walk away from your son. Then I let the truth finish the rest. Vincent's face went through something close to grief. Denial first, then disbelief, then a slow, panicked recalculation. That's impossible, he said hoarsely. Thornfield Capital is an institutional investor, a fund, a shell, I finished gently. One you never bothered to question because it kept your company alive. Christopher's voice came through the speaker again, clarifying what that ownership meant in practice. Voting power, board influence, control, not theoretical, immediate. Vincent slammed his palm on the table. Crystal rattled. You expect me to believe you've been sitting in my house, my dinners, while you explained your own business to me? I asked. Yes. Daniel hadn't moved. He was staring at me like he was trying to reconcile two realities at once, the woman he married and the force he'd never been allowed to see. Isabel finally found her voice, thin and sharp. Then why? She demanded. Why live like this? Why let us think that I was small, I said. Because I needed to know who you were when you believed I had nothing. Vincent stood abruptly, chair nearly tipping. This is extortion. No, I replied evenly. This is disclosure. I reminded him, quietly, of 2009, of the debt, of the banks that stopped returning his calls, of the projects that would have died without emergency capital. I listed them one by one. Riverfront, lakeside, suburban parks. Every lifeline he'd clung to. My money, I said, every time. Isabel whispered, but you drive a Camry. I smiled faintly. It runs. Daniel finally spoke. You watched them do this to you, he said, voice tight. All this time? Yes, I answered. And I watched you choose me anyway. That was when Vincent tried to recover authority. He pointed at me, shaking. I didn't know who you were. Would it have mattered? I asked. Would offering money to erase me be any less grotesque if I'd been exactly who you thought? Isabel began crying, mascara streaked. She said they were protecting Daniel. I laughed once, without humor. You were controlling him. I opened my email. The message was already drafted. I'd written it months earlier, not knowing when, only knowing there would be a moment. I sent it. Emergency board meeting, Monday morning. Agenda, CEO review. Vincent's composure shattered. You can't do this. I can, I said softly. And I will. Christopher asked if he should proceed with notifications. I looked at Vincent, collapsed now, hands in his hair. At Isabel, clutching pearls like armor. At Daniel, who deserved better than this theater. Yes, I said. Proceed. The power in the room shifted, not with shouting, not with threats, but with inevitability, and they all felt it. The drive home was silent, not the peaceful kind, the heavy, suffocating kind that presses against your chest and makes every passing streetlight feel accusatory. Daniel stared out the passenger side window, city lights reflecting faintly in his eyes. His hands rested in his lap, clenched and unclenched without rhythm. I kept both hands on the steering wheel, steady, controlled, because if I let go, I wasn't sure what would surface. 15 minutes passed before he spoke. How long? He asked quietly. Have you been carrying all of this alone? I swallowed. My throat burned. Longer than I should have. He nodded once, not in anger, in grief. Grief for the dinners he apologized for the nights he believed he wasn't enough, for the version of himself that thought love meant enduring humiliation. When we reached our apartment, neither of us moved right away. The building looked exactly as it always had, modest, unremarkable, real. And suddenly, it felt like the only place in the world that wasn't lying to us. Inside, Daniel finally broke. He didn't shout. He didn't accuse. He sat on the edge of the couch and buried his face in his hands. I feel like I failed you, he said. I should have stopped them. I knelt in front of him, took his hands. You didn't fail me. You chose me every day without knowing there was anything to gain. Tears slipped down his cheeks anyway. That night, sleep never came. I lay awake replaying every dinner, every insult I'd cataloged instead of confronting. I'd told myself I was observing, learning, waiting for truth. But there was a cost. I had let the man I loved doubt himself. I had let him believe his parents' cruelty was somehow his burden to manage. And in that realization, I hit bottom. Because power is meaningless if it wounds the people you're trying to protect. Sometime before dawn, Daniel reached for my hand. Whatever happens next, he whispered, I choose you. The words should have comforted me. Instead, they reminded me how close I came to breaking something precious in the name of patience. And I knew what came next couldn't be about revenge. It had to be about repair. Monday morning arrived without ceremony. No dramatic music, no sense of victory, just consequences. Daniel went to work like any other day. I drove him there in the same Camry. Same traffic, same coffee cup between us. The world hadn't shifted. Yet. At 9:03 a.m., my phone buzzed. Christopher. The board meeting is in session, he said, just as expected. I didn't rush downtown. I didn't sit in a corner office watching faces fall. I stayed home, made tea, waited. Because real power doesn't require presence. At 10:47 a.m., the second call came. 78% in favor, Christopher said. Vincent has been removed as CEO effective immediately. Interim leadership installed. Market reaction is already positive. I closed my eyes, not in triumph, but relief. Daniel texted a single line from work. Did it happen? I replied, yes, but it's not over. That evening, Isabel called 17 times. Daniel didn't answer a single one. The next day, a certified letter arrived, handwritten. Isabel's handwriting was careful, controlled, but the words weren't. She wrote that she didn't expect forgiveness, that what they'd done was unforgivable, that fear had blinded them, that they believed they were protecting Daniel, when in reality they were trying to preserve control. She asked whether they could talk when we were ready. No checks, no lawyers, just a mother trying to understand her son's wife. Daniel read the letter twice. Then he set it down. He asked me what I thought. I told him the truth. Fear makes people honest in ways comfort never does. I said I'd give them one chance on our terms. in our apartment. No performances, no power displays. If they could accept us as we actually are, there might be something left to rebuild. If not, at least we'd know. Daniel typed the response himself. Dinner at our place, Friday. No dress code, no expectations. When he "Is this too much?" he asked. "It's exactly enough," I said. That Friday, they arrived smaller somehow. Vincent in jeans. Isabel without armor. No mansion, no staff, just pasta on our small table and 4 people standing at the edge of truth. And for the first time, they listened. Vincent spoke first. Not with authority, not with performance, with humility. Awkward, unpracticed, but real. He looked at me across our small dining table and said he owed me apologies, plural, for every dinner where he made me feel insignificant, for every comment about my work, my car, my potential, for that check, sliding it across the table like I was a problem he could buy his way out of. "I reduced you to a number," he said, voice cracking, and I was wrong. I listened. Then I told him the apology I needed wasn't mine. I turned to Daniel. "Tell him," I said gently. Vincent's eyes filled as he faced his son. He apologized for treating Daniel like a possession instead of a person, for valuing status over his happiness, for nearly destroying the one relationship that mattered most to him through pride. Daniel didn't rush to forgive. He didn't punish either. He asked one question. Will this actually change? Isabel reached for his hand. She admitted she'd spent Daniel's entire life preparing him for a specific future, a specific marriage. When he chose differently, she felt rejected. But she finally understood. He wasn't rejecting them. He was choosing something real. She apologized for measuring love in currency. That night ended without miracles, but with honesty. 3 days later, the fallout became public. Blackwood Development announced restructuring. Vincent remained as senior advisor. Authority reduced, compensation adjusted. Professional leadership took over. Markets responded immediately. Stock climbed. Vincent lost the company he thought he owned, but he gained perspective. Daniel's nonprofit expanded. I funded it, not as a grand gesture, but as a continuation of who we already were. Community programs, scholarships, opportunity where it had once been denied to me. Vincent and Isabel began coming to dinner every 2 weeks. No expectations. No posturing. Vincent traded his luxury car for something practical, joking that if a billionaire could drive a Camry, he could survive without a Mercedes. And for the first time, they met me, not my balance sheet. The humiliation they dealt returned to them quietly, without my help. Truth has a way of doing that. 6 months after that dinner, the one with the check, the silence, the truth, I sat on our apartment balcony with Daniel, watching the city glow below us. The same apartment, the same view, the same life we had chosen when we believed it was all we could afford. Daniel leaned back in his chair and asked me something I'd been expecting. Do you ever regret it? Letting them humiliate you for so long? Not telling the truth sooner? I didn't answer immediately, because the truth deserved honesty, not drama. Not once, I said finally. If I had spoken earlier, I would have proven my wealth, but learned nothing about character. I would have silenced their cruelty, but never understood its depth. I would have protected myself, but denied Daniel the chance to see his parents clearly, without illusion. Now we know. We know he chose me when he thought I was ordinary. We know I chose him without leverage, advantage, or performance. We know his parents loved him, but confused control for care. And we know they are capable of change, because fear stripped them of pretense. Money didn't fix our family. Truth did. Today, Blackwood Development is healthier than it's ever been, run by professionals who understand responsibility better than ego. Daniel's nonprofit has grown beyond what either of us imagined, helping people who remind me of who I was at 24, capable, driven, and invisible to those who only look at status. We still drive the Camry. We still live here by choice. Vincent now asks questions instead of assuming answers. Isabel listens more than she speaks. They come to dinner as parents, not patrons. And Daniel? Daniel sleeps easier, stands straighter, laughs more freely. One night, he asked me who I really am. I told him I'm a financial analyst, an investor, a wife, a woman who learned that the most powerful people in any room are often the ones no one is watching. That check didn't change everything. What changed everything was the moment people showed who they truly were and the choice we made after seeing it. I chose love over revenge, patience over spectacle, and a future built on something money can never buy. Because the best victories, they arrive quietly and last forever.